Now, to give you some automotive examples of those types of locks, first we're going to look at this Ford tin-cut door lock. Notice that all of the wafers are flush right now because the key is in it. If I take the key out, you see all of the wafers went to one side. So these are not opposing wafers. They all pull to the same direction. Now if you'll look right here, you can see, it's kind of difficult to see, but going towards the bottom of this shell, you can see that this is the wafer chamber, where the wafers are going to go down into that chamber and lock the lock. So with the key in there, they're all lined up. We can put it in there and we can turn it around and so on. But if you watch here in the window, when I pull the key out, you'll see all 6 wafers slide down into the chamber, the locking wafer chamber, like that. They're all down in there now. Starting from the front, there's 1, 2, and then the middle one's 3, 4, then back here 5, 6. Whereas if I look at a Ford 8-cut lock, now this is a Ford 8-cut door lock. It only has 6 wafers in the door lock, but you can see 3 are going one direction and 3 the other. So here's an example of a lock with opposing wafers. Here's an example of a sidebar lock. The sidebar is right here. This happens to be the Ford tin-cut ignition lock also. Notice this cover, which covers the wafers so that the wafers are maintained inside the plug. When the key is in, the sidebar is recessed slightly, allowing the plug to turn. I have the key in the lock now, and if I start to take the key out, you'll see the sidebar pop out. Just takes a little bit of movement with the key and the sidebar will pop out. So that's an example of a sidebar lock. Ford 8-cut ignition lock is a good example of a sidebar lock with opposing wafers. I put the key in, sidebar is right here. If I take the key out, you'll see the sidebar pop out. Now, once the plug is back in the shell, the wafers stay retained in the plug. They do not lock the plug. Only the sidebar locks the plug. But if I take the key out, you will see again that we have opposing wafers. In this case, there's 7 wafers, 4 on one side and 3 on the other. So that's an example of opposing wafers with the sidebar. If you can see in this shell for this lock, this is the chamber for the sidebar. There's no other chambers in the shell for the wafers to lock into. So it's just that one component, the sidebar, that locks the lock. Okay, now on this Ford tin-cut lock, notice that the keyway is offset. It's not in the center. And that's quite often a dead giveaway that you're dealing with a sidebar lock. If you look at this Ford 8-cut lock, that keyway's in the center too, isn't it? But this is also a sidebar lock. So you cannot always tell if you're dealing with sidebar lock simply by looking at where the keyway is located at. I want to review the 4 categories or types of locks that Ford has used for about 50 years now. And the most recent lock, of course, is a high security lock that we're not going to cover on this film. But as this video is being made in 2014, Ford is still using, on many of their vehicles, an 8-cut lock, which they introduced in 1996. Before that lock came out, Ford was using a 10-cut lock. Both the Ford 8-cut and the Ford 10-cut lock are wafer locks. The 10-cut lock was introduced in 1984 and began to go away by the late 90s, but can still be found on a few cars up through 2002 models. Before the 10-cut lock, Ford was using a 5-pin tumbler lock. From 1965 to 1991, most of their cars were equipped with this 5-cut pin tumbler lock. Now, many of those began to go away when the 10-cut lock was introduced, but they continued to use that 5-cut lock, especially on their heavier pickups, up through 1991. So we are going to go ahead and cover that lock in this course because there are quite a few of those vehicles still on the road today. Before 65, Ford was using a different 5-cut pin tumbler lock. And we're not going to cover that category of locks. I want to just make you aware of it, that if you get a call for a Ford that is made before really 1966, you want to be cautious. They don't always make their transitions all at one time. They begin to introduce the locks, and it can take a long time to phase out the old lock and go completely to the new lock. So anytime you're close to the year of a transition, you want to check and see which particular lock you're dealing with. But from 1956 to 1966, Ford used a 5-cut pin tumbler lock, but it is different from the one that was introduced in 65. So be aware of that it's a different keyway, and takes different tryout keys to make a key for it, and that kind of thing. But in this course, we will make keys for the Ford 8-cut lock system, the Ford 10-cut lock system, and the Ford 5-cut lock system that was in use between 65 and 91. Okay, the first locks that we're going to make a key for will be the Ford 8-cut lock. And again, this is an example of a fairly standard 8-cut ignition lock and an 8-cut door lock. They come in different varieties. So this is kind of the standard, but there are some that look different than from what you see right here. And that's pretty much true for basically every lock. Never expect all of the locks in one category to look the same. With the Ford 8-cut lock, the normal position for the wafers in the door will be wafers 1 through 6. You're going to have 3 on one side and 3 on the other. The odds on one side, the evens on the other. We have to find out which wafer is the deepest, and that's going to be the number 6. Now that is unless we have one of those cars that has 2 through 7. If we have a car that's 2 through 7, the deepest wafer would be a 7. But nearly all of the Ford vehicles have 1 through 6 in the door. And I'll point out the exceptions for the most part that you need to look for. Then the ignition has 7 tumblers in it, 2 through 8. So again, you're going to have the evens on one side and the odds on the other. The second key that we make will be for a 10-cut set. Ford 10-cut sidebar ignition and a Ford 10-cut door lock. For the Ford 10-cut system, the doors have 1 through 6. All of the wafers are on one side. The ignition uses 5 through 10, again all on one side, with 5 and 6 being common to both locks. Now with the Ford 8-cut and Ford 10-cut, you're going to have to just look to see which side the wafers are on. The wafers could be on the top or they could be on the bottom. With the 8-cut, you could have the evens on the top or the evens on the bottom. So you're going to have to look in the lock and make sure that you know which wafers are where before you start making a key. And the third key that we're going to make, actually it'll be 2 keys here because these locks do not take the same key, but these are the pin tumbler locks, 5-cut pin tumbler locks, ignition lock and a door lock. And I'll show you how to make the keys for these locks. The forged pin tumbler locks, you have 5 tumblers in the door. They are normally on the top. In the ignition, you have 5 tumblers in the ignition, and they are normally on the bottom. Please take just a moment to like the video and also subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.